For years, the Iranian regime prepared for the wrong war. They built bunkers against missiles. They trained armies for foreign enemies. They strengthened air defenses, cyber units, and intelligence networks. They believed the final blow would come from the sky. But history has a cruel sense of humor. When the collapse finally came, it did not arrive in fighter jets or drones. It came in trucks, it came in cranes, it came in silent engines, it came in empty highways. And suddenly, the mighty Islamic Republic found itself fighting something far more dangerous than bombs: its own people. Imagine this for a moment. You wake up in a country of 88 million people, but nothing moves. Ports are frozen, highways are blocked, oil valves are closed, factories are silent, markets are locked. Not because of war, not because of sanctions, but because millions of ordinary citizens simply decided to stop. That is what happened in Iran. In the south, cranes stopped at the port of Bandar Abbas, the lifeline of Iran's trade in the Persian Gulf. Ships waited helplessly in open waters, their cargo trapped like prisoners at sea. In the west, oil workers shut down production in ahvaz, cutting off the regime's main source of cash. Without oil, Iran is not a state. It is a struggling organization with a flag. On highways stretching from north to south, millions of drivers turned off their engines. Iran didn't just slow down, it stopped breathing. Trade with China collapsed. Logistics with Russia broke down. Supply chains disintegrated. And suddenly, the regime discovered a terrifying truth. You cannot rule a country if the country refuses to move. Governments are used to protests. They know how to deal with chants, banners, and marches. But this was different. This was not noise. This was strategy. More than 6 million workers joined coordinated strikes. Truck drivers blocked highways with their vehicles. Business owners closed markets not for profit, but for survival. This was not chaos. It was organized paralysis. The Iranian state was not attacked from outside. It was economically strangled from within. And the most frightening part? No bullets were fired. Every revolution has a moment when fear breaks. In Iran, that moment came on December 28, 2025. Not in parliament, not in the streets, but in the Grand Bazaar of Tehran. The bazaar is not just a market. It is the heartbeat of Iran's economy and political power. When the Iranian rial lost 80% of its value in a single year and inflation crossed 70%, merchants realized something painful. This was no longer about profit. It was about survival. Shops began to close, not quietly, not temporarily, systematically. For decades, the regime had promoted the idea of a resistance economy, an economy strong enough to survive sanctions and isolation. But the bazaar exposed the truth. There was no resistance economy. There was only exhaustion. When merchants shut their doors, they were not just closing shops. They were closing the illusion. If December was the warning, January was the explosion. On January 11, 2026, something unprecedented happened in Shiraz. Between 1.5 and 2 million drivers turned off their engines, not randomly, not emotionally, but deliberately. Footage verified by international media showed trucks parked across highways like walls, vehicles forming barricades, drivers chanting slogans openly, fear visibly gone. This was not a strike for higher wages. This was not a protest for fuel subsidies. This was political. Truck drivers, business owners, and local communities acted in solidarity with what many called a national uprising. And suddenly, the regime realized it had a problem it could not shoot. Because you can arrest protesters, but you cannot arrest an entire supply chain. What started in Shiraz spread faster than the regime could comprehend. Within hours, the crisis reached Isfahan. And Isfahan is not just another city. It is Iran's industrial heart, its military backbone, its strategic nerve center, steel factories, chemical plants, defense industries, uranium enrichment facilities. All roads lead through Isfahan. When logistics collapsed there, it became clear this was not a protest. This was systemic failure. Reports showed that commercial trucks disappeared from highways leading to Tehran. For miles, there was nothing. No food deliveries, no fuel shipments, no raw materials. Tehran, a city of 15 million people, was suddenly isolated, not by an army, by its own economy. When people hear the word siege, they imagine tanks, soldiers, and artillery. But Tehran experienced something far more terrifying. Supermarket shelves began to empty. Flour shipments stopped. Bakeries could not bake bread. The regime tried to intervene using military trucks. But reality is stubborn. You cannot feed 88 million people with military logistics. You cannot run a modern economy with soldiers, and you certainly cannot replace millions of skilled workers with men holding rifles. One Iranian worker put it simply, you can force a soldier to stand guard, but you cannot force him to operate a CNC machine. That sentence says everything. While Tehran struggled with shortages, a deeper crisis was unfolding in Tabriz. Tabriz is not just an industrial city, it is a fault line. Ethnic tensions, economic inequality, and political frustration intersect there like tectonic plates. Reports indicated that nearly 1 million workers joined strikes in the region. Factories stopped, production lines froze, raw materials vanished. The automotive industry, one of Iran's most important sectors, was hit at its core. Machinery manufacturers shut down, parts suppliers halted operations. The regime sent the Revolutionary Guards to break the strike. But there was a problem. The soldiers had guns, the workers had skills, and skills cannot be replaced with intimidation. Factories without workers are just expensive buildings. For decades, the Iranian government feared foreign invasion, but what it faces now is something far worse. Foreign enemies attack from outside. You can rally people against them, but when the economy collapses from inside, there is no enemy to blame. No missiles, no NATO, no CIA, just millions of citizens saying, "We are done." And here is the uncomfortable question. How did a state that claimed to be resilient, strong, and untouchable become so fragile in a matter of weeks? How did Iran's so-called resistance economy turn into a house of cards? And more importantly, is this the beginning of the end, or just the beginning of something even more dangerous? Because what happens next will not only shape Iran, it could reshape the balance of power across the Middle East and beyond. And that's where the story gets even more complicated. When ports die, states suffocate. At this point, the Iranian economy isn't just wounded, it's bleeding out. And the blood loss is happening where modern states are most vulnerable: supply chains. Right now, inside Iran, cars can't be built. Not because people don't want cars, but because parts don't exist. White goods sit half-assembled. Agricultural machinery is broken and cannot be repaired. Factories are silent, not from lack of orders, but from lack of components. Economists have a polite name for this, a supply shock. But there's nothing polite about what comes next. Supply shocks are the fastest, most brutal trigger of hyperinflation. You can print money, you can shout slogans, you can arrest critics, but you cannot buy goods that no longer exist. And that's where Iran is headed. If Iran's economy is a body, then Bandar Abbas is its lungs. And right now, those lungs have collapsed. This is not a strike anymore. This is an occupation. Between 500,000 and 800,000 port workers have effectively shut down Iran's gateway to the world. This single port handles 70% of Iran's non-oil exports. That number is now approaching zero. Food imports, blocked. Medicine, stuck offshore. Containers, locked in place. Ships float helplessly in open waters, unable to unload. Warehouses are full of goods rotting into waste or leaking into the black market. Footage circulating online shows something unprecedented. Port workers clashing with police, resisting regime forces, storming administration buildings, even tearing down regime flags. This is not symbolism. This is sovereignty being challenged physically. The regime responded the only way it knows how. It militarized the port, deployed soldiers, positioned snipers. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Without crane operators, nothing moves. A soldier cannot unload a container ship. A sniper cannot replace a logistics system. The port workers understand this. They don't need weapons. They have leverage, and they're using it. If ports are lungs, oil is blood. And in Ahvaz and the Khuzestan region, that blood has stopped flowing. Iran's oil workers didn't slow production. They shut it down. Valves were closed, refineries halted, the cash tap snapped shut. This wasn't symbolic resistance. This was financial asphyxiation. Iran's oil production has dropped by roughly 40%. Daily losses exceed $150 million. Steel factories in Bandar Abbas, including major facilities like the Madkush steel plant, are fully shut. Off Iran's coast, 160 to 170 million barrels of oil now sit in tankers. Unsold, unmoved, unpaid, that oil might as well be water. Because oil that can't be sold is not wealth, it's dead weight. And without foreign currency, hyperinflation doesn't just loom, it explodes. Let's be clear about something. This is not one group, this is not one city. This is a synchronized national shutdown. Industrial workers, between 2 and 3 million in steel, petrochemical, and manufacturing sectors. When they stop, production drops to zero. Truck drivers, 1.5 to 2 million drivers. When they stop, bread doesn't reach Tehran and fuel doesn't reach stations. Port workers, 600,000 to 800,000 people at strategic choke points like Bandar Abbas. When they stop, Iran is cut off from the world. Shopkeepers, hundreds of thousands closing shutters in 190 cities, especially Tehran's Grand Bazaar, the capillaries of commerce. Together, this costs Iran $100 to $150 million per day. Add internet shutdowns, emergency security deployments, and lost productivity, and in just 14 days, the bill exceeds $3 to $4 billion. In an economy already suffering 70% inflation and 100% food inflation, this is not survivable. The regime may try to print money, but you cannot print bread, you cannot print spare parts, you cannot print logistics. Now we reach the part the regime fears most, the outside world. China and Russia built their Middle East strategy around one assumption, that Iran was stable enough to endure pressure. That assumption is now dead. Let's start with China. Trade data from late 2025 into early 2026 shows a sharp collapse. 24-25% decline, dropping trade volume to $9.96 billion. Why? Because China can't get Iranian oil reliably, and it can't ship goods into a country whose ports are frozen. China is not ideological, it's practical. When logistics fail, China leaves. For Beijing, Iran is no longer a strategic asset, it's a liability. Russia's situation is even worse. Moscow had pinned its hopes on the North-South Transport Corridor, INSTC, through Iran, a workaround to Western sanctions after the Ukraine war. That corridor is now broken. Rail workers are on strike, Caspian ports are stalled, transit routes are frozen, trade with Russia has shrunk 17 to 20%. Russia cannot ship grain through Iran. It cannot receive military components. It cannot rely on Iranian logistics. And so, quietly, pragmatically, Russia is stepping back. No speeches, no statements, just abandonment. Then comes the external pressure. Donald Trump's return and the tariff weapon. The threat of a 25% additional tax on countries doing business with Iran poured gasoline on an already burning economy. Strikes at home, tariffs abroad. This is what economists call a perfect storm. The regime is trapped between internal paralysis and external isolation. And it knows it. So what does a desperate regime do? It panics. Unable to trust its own army, afraid of its own police, it turns outward and inward at the same time. Intelligence reports confirm the deployment of 5,000 Hashd al-Shaabi militia members from Iraq to suppress protests. Let that sink in. A state importing foreign fighters to control its own citizens. That is not governance. That is occupation. Estimates suggest 2,000 to 5,000 people killed, over 26,000 arrested. But the violence isn't breaking the strikes. It's hardening them. The regime cuts the internet, but Starlink and VPNs punch holes in the blackout. The images keep coming. The world is watching. What's happening in Iran is not a labor dispute, not an economic downturn, not a temporary crisis. This is state collapse. From the machinist in Tabriz to the crane operator in Bandar Abbas, from the truck driver in Shiraz to the oil worker in Ahvaz, 6 million people have pulled the plug. A state can have tanks, but if the fuel doesn't arrive, they are just metal. A state can have power, but if goods, oil, and food don't flow, it dies. Iran is not falling in an explosion. It is collapsing in silence. And in that silence, something historic is happening. The Iranian people are rewriting their destiny with sweat, sacrifice, and courage. The regime is drowning in the darkness it created, and somewhere beyond that darkness, a new dawn may be breaking. What do you think? Is this the beginning of the end or the start of something even more dangerous? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Support our work by liking this video and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our in-depth analysis, because this story isn't over, not even close.